Ladies and gentlemen, the console war is over. Nintendo won years ago, and they will continue to win unless the industry changes in a big way. That's a big statement, but hear me out. I'm not saying consoles as a whole are dying, and I'm not saying PlayStation and Xbox will stop making games altogether. What I am saying is that as prices continue to rise and exclusives become less exclusive, the proposition value of a traditional console is starting to fade. But not for Nintendo. We're gonna do a little exercise here. Think of all of the exclusive PlayStation 5 and Xbox games you can. I'll give you a bit. You're thinking? All right, now any of those that came to PC, cut those. Now any of those Xbox exclusives that also came to PlayStation, cut those. What are you left with? Not a lot. No, there's not many. Now I'm going to read to you almost all the exclusives that have come to the Nintendo Switch in the last 5 years. Animal Crossing New Horizons, Paper Mario The Origami King, Bowser's Fury, Mario Golf Super Rush, Mario Superstars, Metroid Dread, New Pokemon Snap, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond. Donkey Kong Bonanza, Metroid Prime 4, Zelda Hyrule Warriors, Pokemon Legends EA. You get it. I needed that paper. Yes, there are a lot of Nintendo Switch games that can only be played on a Nintendo console. Everyone knows this. It's why I bought a Nintendo Switch and Switch 2 on day one. That's why as of now, I will always buy Nintendo consoles. The value proposition for a Nintendo console is multiple, high-quality, first-party games in any given year. Since the Switch 2 came out in June, Nintendo has put out Mario Kart World, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Kirby Air Riders, Pokemon Legends EA, and Metroid Prime 4. Meanwhile, PlayStation has released Death Stranding 2 and Ghost of Yotei, two great games that will undoubtedly come to PC next year. There was a time when exclusives were the biggest selling point for all three consoles. I bought an Xbox 360 because I thought Gears of War looked rad and I knew Halo 3 would only be on the 360. I bought a PS4 because I wanted to play Naughty Dog's next game. That simply isn't the case anymore. With little patience, I can play nearly every PlayStation and Xbox exclusive on Steam. Not even just on my PC, but on a unified storefront. For the first time, I think ever, I've taken my Xbox and packed it up. I don't use my Xbox. I haven't used it in a long time. I don't need to use my Xbox. Now, I understand the pain of building a PC, setting up a PC. It's a lot of work. It can be a little finicky. Something might go wrong. But let's dig a little deeper though. A lot of people don't buy a console just for the exclusives. A big selling point is the reasonable price tag and convenience of owning a console over a PC. I like the idea of having a piece of tech that is designed for playing games first and foremost, but even this argument is starting to erode. The Xbox Series X has only gotten more expensive since it launched in 2020, and the PS5 Pro is $750. Sure, you may not be able to find a PC at a similar price range that packs the same punch as a PS5 Pro, but graphically we're starting to split hairs here. Do you remember that PS5 Pro video where Mark Cerny would zoom in like 5 times to show that the image was a little bit sharper? As a PS5 Pro owner, I'll be the first to admit that this is getting ridiculous. Look, there will always be a market for folks who want the best possible frame rates and resolutions, but as consoles and PC parts get more and more expensive, I have to imagine this contingent will shrink even further. But I think it gets even more complicated when you consider the Steam machine coming out early next year, or the first half of next year. To me, this thing kind of represents where consoles are going in the future, right? We are seeing a world where pretty much there's no such things as exclusives aside from Nintendo. Those are coming to everything. They're coming to Steam. You get a Steam machine, in theory, you'd have access to most of PlayStation's exclusive library, all of Xbox's exclusive library. Sure, not all of those games come out day and date. I think a lot of Sony exclusives, they like to wait 6 months, sometimes a year. But I think considering everything Steam has going for it, the draw of buying a PlayStation day one because you need to play a specific game kind of isn't appealing anymore, especially when they're only releasing like 2 to 3 exclusives a year. And looking ahead, it sounds like the next Xbox console and PlayStation 6 are catering to that hardcore audience who want the highest fidelity, at least based on what we know so far, which is not much. But as the line between consoles and PCs blur, the value proposition for a console gets thinner and thinner and thinner, especially as the price closes in on $1,000. Times are tough and folks are starting to get priced out of this. And look, if you're willing to spend that much on a console, when does it make more sense to just bite the bullet and build a PC or get a Steam machine? The cherry on top being that Steam is way more consumer friendly than Sony or Microsoft. But I also think there's something else here that I don't think a lot of people talk about, and it is how Nintendo operates as a company versus less so PlayStation, but especially Microsoft. There's a reason why Nintendo games are generally higher quality experiences. There are exceptions, sure, but Nintendo exclusives are well-designed, polished games that feel like premium products. Aside from a Pokemon game here or there, I've never picked up a Nintendo game concerned that it may not work. Sure, Nintendo games might not be for you, and that's totally fine, but they are more consistent than Sony and way more consistent than Microsoft, especially when you consider the sheer volume of exclusives they put out. The way I see it, there are 2 reasons for this. One, Nintendo isn't trying to chase cutting-edge graphics and instead opting for distinct art styles. These past couple generations have really shown how higher fidelity presentation leads to longer development times, bigger teams, and larger budgets. By doubling down on artistic style, Nintendo has largely been able to avoid this side of development. I love a good Sony AAA experience. Ghost of Yotei was a lot of fun. Big fan of The Last of Us, but those games take so long to make, and they're only going to take longer unless the technology or workflow changes, right? So production budgets are expanding, they're ballooning, but also it requires way more staff. You need hundreds, if not thousands of people working on these games, and the costs just keep going up and up and up. Now 2, and probably more importantly, Nintendo doesn't lay people off, at least not in the same way Microsoft has this year. Institutional knowledge is a thing, and when you're constantly bleeding employees and relying on contract work, a lot gets lost in the mix. Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild exists because developers like Eiji Aonuma have been working on Zelda for decades. Now obviously there are some cultural differences at play here, but that doesn't change the fact that Nintendo has consistently put out some of the best games of all time in just the last decade. So look, I'm not here saying that, in 10 years, Xbox and PlayStation are going to be gone and Nintendo will rule everything. I don't think that'll be the case. I think there will still be plenty of Sony developed and published games. I think there will still be hardware from both Xbox and Sony. I'm less confident about Xbox than Sony. I think the PlayStation 5 has sold like 84 million units at this point, so I think Sony is safe. But what I am saying is that this proposition value of consoles, of platforms, is getting very nebulous. There is less and less of a reason to spend almost $1,000 on a console when you can build a PC, get way more out of it. Meanwhile, over here we have Nintendo, which is still kind of fulfilling that proposition value of a console. You buy a Nintendo console and you have access to a bunch of exclusives that you can only play there. It gives me a reason to buy a Nintendo console. And look, I'm not saying that every platform holder needs to become Nintendo. Nintendo has its fair share of issues that are worth examining and criticizing, and their business strategy can't be replicated. I'm also not saying to ditch your consoles and go out and build a PC right now. What I am saying is that now, more than ever, especially as prices continue to rise, there are fewer and fewer incentives to buy into the Xbox or PlayStation ecosystem. The only console that still consistently gives me a reason to turn it on is my Nintendo Switch 2. When the next Xbox and the PlayStation 6 come out, honestly, I may not buy them. And that'll be the first time since the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. That'll be the first time ever. Not even that. That'll be the first time ever where I'm not going to get the big Xbox and PlayStation console because there's just not a reason to. There's not a reason, but I will still be purchasing Nintendo consoles if they continue this business strategy. So is the console war over? Has Nintendo won? Let me know in the comments below, and for more end of year and game of the year coverage, stay tuned to GameSpot.